This is Now What? Life After Redundancy, when your job disappears, but you don't. Hello. I'm Stevie, and you're joining me on my journey through and hopefully past redundancy, where I'm regularly asking myself the question, now what? This podcast is where I try to make sense of the messy middle in real time. It's part job hunt, part life admin, part why does my brain feel like a browser with 46 tabs open and occasional moments of calm that I treat like rare wildlife sightings. Today's episode is about pre-interview preparation, but very deliberately from the angle of this is what helps me. Not here's the perfect system that works for everyone, and not be your authentic self delivered like a corporate lullaby. It's the stuff that I do that reduces panic, stops me freezing, and helps me represent myself properly when I finally get the chance to speak to human beings who may or may not employ me. I'm going to walk you through what I do across 3 phases. So 2 days before, the day before, and the day of, right up until the interview itself. The aim is to make sure you're not trying to retrieve your best examples from the depths of your memory whilst also maintaining eye contact and pretending your heart rate is normal. And to be honest, interviews don't happen in a vacuum. They happen in the middle of the job hunt, which can sometimes feel like you're in a film where the montage never ends, except instead of Rocky training up the steps, it's you updating a CV, opening some more Windows tabs, and trying to convince yourself this is all character development. Before we get into the preparation, let's acknowledge the bit we all recognize. The interview invite comes through, and suddenly you can hear your own heartbeat. So getting an interview invite when you're job hunting after redundancy is a very specific emotional experience. Firstly, you feel relief, proper relief, the kind where your shoulders drop and you think, okay, someone replied. I'm not just sending applications into the void like messages in a bottle. And then, almost immediately, your brain goes, right, this is it, this is the moment, don't mess it up. It's like your entire nervous system clocks that calendar invite and decides it needs to help. It starts revving, it starts preparing, it starts doing that thing where it interprets professional conversation with strangers as ancient survival threat. Because interviews are odd. They're a strange social ritual where you're expected to be confident but humble, detailed but concise, warm but efficient, and relaxed while someone assesses you. And that pressure is real, especially after redundancy, because it can feel like you're not just trying to get a job, you're trying to reclaim your stability. You're trying to repair your sense of identity and prove to yourself that you're still you, and that being made redundant didn't quietly downgrade your value as a human being. Also, job hunting can do a number on confidence. Silence and rejection have a way of becoming the loudest data point if you're not careful. So when an interview comes up, it can feel like you have to perform competence rather than just communicate it. And the part that makes it extra frustrating, you can be brilliant at your job and still struggle in interviews. Not because you don't know your stuff, but because interviews are not the same environment as doing the actual work. Doing the work is frequently collaborative, you have time, context, you have documents, you have history, and you can ask questions and check things. Interviews are the opposite. They're time limited, you're on the spot, you're being watched. You're trying to remember examples while your brain is busy monitoring your voice, your face, and whether you're saying, too much. And anxiety does weird things to memory. You may have years of experience and still blank on the simplest example because your brain has decided to protect you by deleting your entire professional history in real time. So you sit there thinking, I know I've done good things, but your mind becomes an empty fridge and you're being asked to cook a 3-course meal while the time is running. That's the problem. Now, I wanted to share an anecdote because this is where I realized that I needed a better structure. One of the first interviews I had after redundancy, I panic prepared. I did some useful things, but I did them in the way that was more frantic than focused. I was trying to outrun my own anxiety by doing more prep, as if volume would equal calm. I researched the company to the lowest level of detail. I could outline their latest product launch and the market reaction. I'd read the press releases, I had opinions, I had context. I could probably have hosted a small quiz or TED talk about them. And to be clear, none of this was bad. It just wasn't necessary for the role I was applying for. But in my head, it felt like great back pocket material, because I was treating the interview like a survival situation where the more information you carry, the safer you are. Like I might need to suddenly prove my worth by reciting their quarterly strategy, like I'd been raised by their brand guidelines. Meanwhile, I hadn't really mapped my examples to the role itself. There was overlap, but it was accidental. I went in with some really good stories rather than the right stories for the problems that they were hiring to solve. So I could answer questions, but the answers didn't always land, and I could see it as it was happening. I didn't always feel like I was steering the conversation. I felt like I was hoping the conversation would wander into areas where I happened to have a good example. And afterwards, I had that very specific post-interview feeling where you don't think you completely messed it up, but you also don't feel like you showed the best version of yourself. You replay it in your head and think, oh, why didn't I say it like that? Or why did I spend ages on the background and then rush the actual impact? Or why did I mention that one thing like it was a minor detail when it's actually a fantastic example of me being competent? So that interview experience made something really clear to me. I didn't actually need to prepare harder, I needed to prepare smarter. I had to put some structure around what it meant so that I wasn't relying on adrenaline and hope. And I absolutely have to caveat this, I still don't have a role. I'm not telling you this while I'm holding a signed contract and a smug little everything happens for a reason. But what I can say is that in more recent interviews I've had, I've walked out thinking, okay, that was me. That was a strong representation of what I can do. And the reason that matters is because one of the worst parts of redundancy is when you start doubting whether you're even good at what you do. Anything that helps you show up clearly and leave feeling grounded is not a small thing. So with that context, let's get into the structured approach that's helped me. So 2 days before the interview is when I do the majority of the work that makes everything easier. And because I've done this for previous interviews, the subsequent times I needed to do it, it's become even easier. But essentially, I build what I call my evidence bank. And the goal is to get the remembering done before the pressure of the interview. Because in the interview itself, your brain may suddenly act like it's never met you. So I do the meeting in advance. And the first step is to list everything I've ever done at the highest level of detail. I sit down with a blank document, get it on Excel, and I start listing everything I can remember that I've ever done at work. So projects I've delivered, problems solved, improvements made, situations handled, things I've led, things I've influenced, conflict, failure, times I've learned quickly, times I stepped into ambiguity. I'm not trying to write this beautifully. It's not public, it's not a CV, I'm not posting it on LinkedIn. This is just me emptying out my professional pockets onto the table. At first, you'll write the obvious stuff, the headline achievements, the big projects, the ones you already know that you'd mention. And then you'll think you're done. But at that point, you keep going anyway. Because after the obvious things, you start remembering some of the real work, the day-to-day impact that never made it onto your CV because it just seemed normal at the time. You remember things like the time you untangled a messy stakeholder situation, a process you quietly improved, a decision that you influenced, an outcome that you protected, a person that you coached. This is also helpful in rebuilding your confidence. It's not motivational nonsense, it's just evidence. It reminds you that you're not just someone applying for jobs, you're someone who has done things. Now, step 2, once you've exhausted your pockets of impact, deepen the clearest examples that you have. So once I've listed everything I can, I go back and identify the ones I remember most clearly. So they aren't necessarily the biggest ones, they're just the clearest ones. And then I flesh them out. I put it into plain sentences, what the situation was, what the problem was, what I did specifically, what got in the way, what the outcome was, and what changed because of it. And wherever possible, I add numbers if I can, because numbers are sticky. But if I can't add numbers, I do add concrete details. So instead of improve the process, I'll write something like I reduced handovers, or made the workflow clearer, or stopped the same issue happening repeatedly. The aim is to give myself a ladder back into the memory. Because in the interview, you don't want to be building the story from scratch. You want to be selecting from the stories that you understand. Now, step 3 is a CV line-by-line audit. And it's specifically engineered to help in the situation where an interviewer asks you to tell them about a specific thing on your CV. So I take my CV and the version that I know the interviewer has, and I go through every single line and every single claim that I make in it. Every bullet point, tool, project name, every outcome. And I frame my work. If they point to this thing and says, tell me about this, do I have an answer? Now, there are natural overlaps with the previous evidence bank, and that's fine. The evidence bank is broad. The CV audit is targeted. And that step is around closing the gaps. Because there is nothing worse than your interviewer picking one line from your CV and your brain goes blank. And it wouldn't be because you lied, not because you don't know it, but because your brain has decided that this is the perfect time to forget what you meant by implemented improved stakeholder engagement strategy. So if I find any line on my CV that could trip me up, I write a short note underneath, 1 or 2 sentences that help me start the answer. And it turns a potential freezing point into a confident entry point every time. And the whole process is genuinely calming because it removes that background fear of being caught out by your own document. Now, the day before the interview, I focus on researching the role, the company, and then I practice saying my examples out loud. So the day before is when I switch from thinking about me to thinking about them. At this point, I've got my evidence bank prepared, I've got my CV understood, and now I want to match what I've done to what they actually need. So step 1 for this is understanding what the role is really asking for. I will have read it multiple times, but I read the job description again properly, and I highlight the parts that they really care about. I look for repeated words, repeated priorities, repeated responsibilities, and I ask myself, what is the problem they're hiring to solve? Because every role exists for a reason. There is a pain point somewhere that job is looking to solve. And then I map my examples to those themes. I'm not trying to bring everything from the evidence bank. I just try to choose a handful of examples that fit. So 2 or 3 examples that match the core responsibilities, an example that shows learning or adaptability, and an example that shows dealing with difficulty, whether it was conflict, failure, or pressure. That way, I'm not hoping the conversation wanders into my strengths. I'm steering it there. And step 2, I research the company, but I do not disappear into the wormhole. So basically, I do research with a time limit. I look at what the company does, what they sell or build, who they serve, what's going on in their world recently if it's relevant, and I try to understand how the role fits into that. Because I want to be able to answer, what do you know about our business? Why do you want to do this role? Why have you chosen us? And not in a performative way, just in a normal and natural way. The trap, as I've learned, is treating the company research as the whole preparation. Because research feels productive because it's safe. It's not exposing, it doesn't require you to talk about yourself. But your interview is mostly about you explaining your experience. So research that you do should support that and not replace it. And step 3 is the part that makes everybody feel awkward, but practice saying your examples out loud. And this is the part that I didn't really lean into as much until I got my head around how this process should work. And it makes a huge, huge difference. Because writing those examples into the evidence bank feels calm. Saying it out loud reveals the chaos. Because out loud is where you ramble. where you over-explain the background and the setup, where you forget to land the impact, and where you bury the best bit of your work under unnecessary context. So I practice speaking my key examples out loud in a simple structure. What happened, what I did, what changed. And I prepare for a few common questions, even if they don't get asked, because having them in my head steadies me. So things like, tell us about a time that you failed, outline a scenario where you face conflict, what is it you can bring to this role, things like that. And yes, depending on the role, I would be using Google and AI tools to generate potential interview questions, just to see what kind of patterns appear. But I don't let that become a hobby. The focus is still, can I explain my examples clearly out loud so that the impact comes through without spending 10 minutes describing the setting like I'm writing some Dan Brown novel? Because under pressure, people can often do the opposite of what helps. They over-explain the context and under-explain their contribution. So rehearsing out loud trains you to get to the point without sounding robotic. It helps you sound like a person who knows what you did. Finally, on the day of the interview, it's not about doing heavy preparation. It's about making some cue cards, managing your adrenaline, and getting yourself into conversation mode. It's about execution and managing your nervous system. So the first thing I would do, I would prepare single word prompts for my examples, and I put them on a cue card or into a notepad. It isn't a script, it isn't a paragraph, it's just base anchors. So reminders of the project names that I've been involved in, reminders of scenarios. Trevor from accounts was awkward. It's a terrible example, but you get the idea. It's just high-level prompts that I can look at and then immediately recall the example that I want to bring out. And if it's a video call, I'll have that list near me. If it's in person, it goes into my pocket. It's not cheating, it's support. Nobody wins anything from remembering everything flawlessly, and having a small prompt reduces the fear of blanking. Now, step 2 is managing your adrenaline and your nerves deliberately. So, about 15 minutes before an interview, my body sometimes gets it into its head that we're about to fight a bear. My heart rate increases, my thoughts speed up, my chest tightens slightly, my brain starts offering me terrible ideas like maybe cancel your internet. So I plan for that spike. I don't treat it as a sign that I'm doomed, I treat it as a predictable, physiological thing. And then I use a mindset that helps me without tipping into anything that sounds like manifesting abundance, because I can't cope with that. I tell myself this is an enjoyable experience. I get to meet someone new. I get to tell someone the cool things I've worked on. And I know that sounds dangerously close to motivational, but for me it works because it moves my brain from threat to conversation. I'm not pretending it doesn't matter. I'm just reminding myself that this is not an attack. I also trick myself with a line that's annoyingly effective. You've been in more difficult conversations than this. Because it's true. I once had to help someone who had thought they had bought a yacht and the yacht didn't exist, and they were deeply, deeply upset. That was a very, very difficult conversation, and it was much more difficult than any interview experience I've had since starting Redundancy. Most of us have had work conversations that were more awkward, more intense, and more emotionally charged than an interview. It's a professional conversation about whether you can help that company solve their problems. And when my nerves are particularly loud, I use box breathing. So this is where you inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds, and then hold for 4 seconds, and you repeat. And just continually doing that helps steady my body. It's boring, and that's the point, but it signals safety. And then I go into the interview. I'm not trying to be flawless. I'm trying to be present, clear, and myself. Now, as I've said, none of this is meant to be a universal system. Some people swear by flashcards, some people read a script and rehearse, some people do 1 quiet hour and call it a day. Some people are just perfect with, I'll just see what happens, which I do assume is a superpower. The point of this isn't a copy my routine and you are going to be golden. It's to suggest that you find your version of preparation that makes you present the best version of you when you have your interviews. This method works for me, and I've found that since following this method, I've been coming out of interviews feeling much, much happier with my performance. The last interview I had, I felt really, really good, to the point that if I don't get offered the role, it means there is someone much better suited for the job. If your method helps you explain what you've done without apologizing for it and keeps your nerves from hijacking the whole thing, then it's the right method, even if it looks nothing like mine. So what's the takeaway? The most impactful thing I've learned about interview preparation is this. The best preparation isn't learning clever answers, it's making your own experiences easy to access under pressure. And that's why, for me, creating this evidence bank of examples matters. It gets all of my remembering done early. It means I'm not trying to invent myself in real time. That's why the CV line-by-line review matters. It removes any potential that I'm going to freeze if I'm asked a question about it. It stops me from being caught off guard by the things that I've written. And it's why practicing out loud matters, because you're going to have your interview using words that you say out loud, not written down. And you want your examples to come out clear without you having to fight your own way through them. So if you take anything from this episode, take a simple structure. 2 days before, list everything you've done. The day before, research the role and practice your examples out loud. And the day of, write some one-word prompts and manage your adrenaline and nerves carefully. That's all for today. If this episode has helped you, please do that thing where you quietly pass it to the person who's got an interview coming up and is currently rewriting their CV like it's going to be graded by Ofsted. No big announcement, no awkward caption, just a small act of public service. Thank you for listening. And if you're asking yourself now what, you're in the right place. Before you go, it's a quick favour. If you like this episode, please hit follow or subscribe. I know every podcast says that, but apparently it actually does something to the mysterious algorithms, and it helps me pretend I'm not just talking to my kettle. So go on, give it a tap.